Hey friends, looking for some great business content other than right here on Accelerate? Then check out C-Suite TV and watch in-depth interviews with business content for C-Suite leaders and entrepreneurs, including an interview with me, your favorite podcast host. And it's all on demand. Watch and get insider secrets on demand by going to csuitetv.com. That's c-suitetv.com. Business insights on demand. Okay, let's do the show. It's time to accelerate. This is Andy. Welcome to episode 442 of Accelerate, where I hold in-depth conversations with today's leading experts in sales, marketing, and leadership 6 days a week. Hey, we all hit slumps from time to time, and if you're struggling with how to get your sales back on track, then go to accelerate.fm/spark and get my free ebook, How to Spark a Sales Turnaround. I've asked over 400 sales experts how they would turn the corner on slumping sales, and I've compiled their recommendations into a practical step-by-step guide that you can use to accelerate your sales today. So don't wait. Go to accelerate.fm/spark, that's S-P-A-R-K, to get your free copy of How to Spark a Sales Turnaround. Joining me on the show is Ray Makela. Ray is the Chief Customer Officer of the Sales Readiness Group, a leading B2B sales and sales management training company focused on improving the performance of sales teams. Now, do you realize there's over $2.2 billion spent every year on sales training in the United States, and yet surveys show wide dissatisfaction with the results among C-level managers, sales leaders, and sales professionals? Well, with Ray, we're going to talk about the 6 reasons why corporate sales training fails, and we're going to hear his recommendations for how to fix it. But first, Ray, what do you consider the biggest challenge facing sales organizations today?
Well, I think they run into a lot of challenges, especially as we look at the new year and as we're going into planning for 2017. But, I think as we've seen over the last few years, customers continue to get smarter and more engaged before the salesperson gets involved. Mm-hmm. And so there's so much noise out there. One, the client is more informed, and there are a lot more people competing for the same dollar.
Right.
So, I think we're all getting inundated with the automated emails, the spam engines, and
shocking. Yes.
Right. So, trying to differentiate yourself beyond that noise, as well as engage with the customer in a meaningful way. I think that's probably the biggest challenge: is how do we make our role meaningful, and how do we matter to our customers?
I agree 100%. And you weren't even aware I was going to ask you that question. So what's the answer?
Right. So I think it means that we need to be better at the way that we engage. And the way we think of that is, and this whole idea of, being an advisor, but we need to understand our client's business before we pick up the phone and make the phone call and say, hey, tell me what keeps you up at night. As I had a client years ago respond to that question and said, I sleep just fine at night and my sleep habits really aren't any of your business.
Yeah, I had that answer once as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that really stuck with me is, you better know what some of their key issues are before you make the first call. You better understand a little bit about their industry and specifically their situation. So
Sure.
The questions you're asking are helping them to either solve a problem or improve their situation. Not helping you just get smart about what's going on.
Right.
So I think we have to be more educated, more in tune, and really be prepared to have a meaningful discussion that's going to help our customer or prospect move forward, as opposed to just educating us on what they do.
Well, right. I think that's really a great point to make for people to think about discovery calls as purely a vehicle for you as a salesperson to get smart about the customer. Is their expectation is increasingly, and I think you hit it nail on the head, is that you're smart before you talk to them. And if you're not, then they don't really have time to educate you.
Yeah, we better bring a few insights, a few nuggets with us to that call that has them stop and think, wow, that was a really good question, or I hadn't really thought about that before, or it's interesting that you did that for somebody else in my industry.
Right.
Now you've piqued my interest. And, with great research tools and the internet and social media, we can find out some of those connection points before we make that first engagement. And I'm not talking about hours and hours, but just taking that time to be a little bit more informed. And guess what? The good news is most of the competition isn't doing that. So you can stand out.
Unfortunately, yes, that's true, right?
Yeah, by the way that you engage.
Yeah. No, I said it's unfortunate. Most competitors aren't. But it's really the inverse of what the customer is doing, as you talked about before, in terms of customers being smarter. they're using the same tools to find out about you and the options that they have and potential solutions to the challenges they have and the goals they want to meet. You're just using the same tools to find out about them. I mean, it's not a mystery.
Absolutely. And you better be a few steps ahead of where they are, even though they're engaging much further along in the sales process than maybe they used to. And they used to rely on the salespeople for that information, right? To be the walking and talking brochure. But now they can get all of that online. They can probably figure out what you do, who you've done it for, and maybe even how much other paid for your services. Sure. So you better have something else that helps to break you out from the noise.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great book I've referenced a couple times on the show recently called Absolute Value, and written by two professors out of Stanford. I call them sort of the heirs to Kahneman and Tversky, but about behavioral economics and psychology and the like. And what their definition of absolute value is that these days customers have the ability through the tools that are available online to them and the resources available online to really sort of almost understand what economists call the experienced value of a product or service, meaning the value they'd receive from it, get a pretty perfect understanding of that before they ever engage with the seller. So it's not just that they are smarter about products in general, that in many cases, the customers actually have a pretty good sense of what's going to be like to use your product even before you engage with them.
Absolutely. And, one other interesting aspect to that, Andy, is, when people say, well, does that mean the salesperson is going to go away? Is the role of the sales professional dead? And I think just the contrary. I think what that means is the salesperson needs to be that much better and needs to do a better job at solving problems and being that advisor than just being the brochure that they can go and get online or they can find out elsewhere. So I think we need to differentiate ourselves by the way that we engage and Absolutely. How we sell, in addition to our products and services.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, and that was my first book was all about that concept. It's right about how you sell, not what you sell, in terms of differentiating yourself. So one of the keys to this, and we wanted to have a conversation about sales training, is training and getting our people more educated, our salespeople more educated, more in tune with the customers. And you wrote an article recently about 6 reasons why corporate sales training failed. But one of the facts you cite in there is this $2.2 billion spent in the U.S. or North America, I guess, on sales training each year. And I think it's fair to say that the general level of satisfaction with the results is not very high. I mean, at least from the articles that I've read and the research I've seen, that CEOs, I remember one research report a couple of years ago, like 70% of CEOs said, I'm not sure why we still do this because we don't get any ROI on it.
Right. I think there are two things going on there. One is we haven't asked the question in the right way to determine if we are getting ROI. Do we know what success looks like? And that's one of the points we'll get to in the article.
Sure.
The other thing is, I think we often go through the motions and it kind of, the training becomes an end to itself as opposed to a means that we're using to solve some other problem or accomplish something in the organization. So I think often it's really hard to look back and say, yes, this was effective and here's why.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think most companies, as you said, treat it as an obligation, as a box to be checked. Yeah, we've got some money in the budget for sales training this year. Let's use it without really thinking about, okay, what's really the best way for us to use this money? I mean, I had a client recently that had a similar conversation. I was like, okay, well, here's what we should be doing. And they said, yep, great idea. But, we had already sort of said we're going to spend it on this. And it's like, okay, but that's not going to give you what you really want. But they were just bound and determined to spend the money.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, why was that money set aside, and what did we think was going to happen? And for that $2.2 billion, what should we be getting? What would a reasonable return be if we were able to really satisfy those objectives?
Well, I think we could argue that $2.2 billion isn't enough if done appropriately. I mean, I think this number I heard from talking to a gentleman, a guest on the show, Frank Cespedes, who's a professor at Harvard Business School. I think it was total expenditure U.S. each year on sales is $90 billion on sales. So we're saying, okay, roughly 2% of that is spent on training, which in any other case would seem laughably low.
Right.
As a percentage that you're spending on developing your employees, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. And if what we're really talking about is allowing us to compete and win more successfully, then that's at the heart. I mean, it's at the heart of their job, but it's also at the heart of what the business is trying to accomplish. And so that is a driver of success. That's more than just a training obligation, as you mentioned.
So how do we start changing the culture around that? Because, I mean, clearly it's a systemic problem that starts at the top, is that, and as for as long as I've been in sales, which, yeah, maybe it's a little bit longer than you, but it's been a while, it's never changed. You know, the seriousness with which most organizations treat it, relatively low. I mean, there's exceptions, obviously. Some organizations do a great job, a real commitment to a learning culture and a learning environment for sales and for all the departments. But in the main, most companies don't. And so what's your thought about how we start making a dent in this culture and sort of turning the ship around?
Right, absolutely. And I think it's a great place to start and to ask that question, because we need to tie it again back to the problem that we're solving. And I think we've often misdiagnosed the problem. So we get this all the time as an example.
Misdiagnosed the problem in terms of what sales training is supposed to fix.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. We may get the question, well, our people need to be better at negotiating and closing, right? And so that's what they say that they're trying to accomplish. And when you peel back that onion and say, well, why is that? It may be because we haven't engaged and learned enough about the problem that we're trying to solve for our customer.
Exactly.
So that when they get into close, the customer's saying, well, you're not really fixing what I'm, the scratch that I have to itch. Or we may just not have engaged at a level that really makes us that advisor.
Exactly. So, the rapport wasn't built, the trust wasn't built. Yeah, right. I'd see people endgaming it all the time. So when you wrote your article about the 6 reasons why corporate sales training fails, that misdiagnosing the problem was actually your first one. And what you're saying is that people just aren't clear about what the objective is, and perhaps even don't break it down far enough. I think, as you're saying, as they see sort of a top level outcome related issue that they want to change, but they don't really look at the fundamentals beneath it.
Absolutely. And I think it's really tied to the second point in the article, that if we don't have the stakeholders involved, so, in sales training cases, that the VP of sales or the chief revenue officer, chief sales officer, if they or their team and staff doesn't have input into defining that, then oftentimes we roll out sales training, it checks the box and we can get huge satisfaction, ratings. And the salespeople said, yeah, that was the best training I ever had. But then the CRO or CSO goes, well, we didn't affect our sales outcome this year.
Right.
Or we didn't improve, we haven't grown the number of opportunities. We haven't improved our close rates. We haven't gotten higher margins. What are those specific outcomes that we're looking for? So we think that those two are very tied together. We need to have those stakeholders involved. And it's like with any change initiative, if we don't have that leadership involved as part of defining the problem and then helping to communicate and set those expectations, we run the risk of really, solving the wrong problem or not addressing the need.
But increasingly, isn't one of the challenges or maybe the issues with sales training is really how it's delivered? I mean, too often now, again, most companies, it's about, hey, twice a year, we're going to go hire Sales Readiness Group, or we're going to hire Andy Paul to come in and give a keynote address. And, for 2 hours, they feel like, okay, we checked the box. We fulfilled our obligation. You guys are now smart, because you listened to somebody's talk for 2 hours, or, went through a one-day workshop with you guys. And that's structurally, that's a problem, right? Because, they're not, you need to be able to reinforce it. You need to have it, the changes adopted at the rate that people can swallow it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest, maybe historical problems with that is training was seen as an event. Mm-hmm. So, it's a 2-day session. We're going to fly everybody to San Diego, and we're going to have some corporate meetings, and we're going to do 2 days of training. And everybody's going to leave and they're going to be smarter. And, the question I always like to ask is, what's going to happen on Monday when they get back into the field? What's going to be different? What commitments are they making? Right. And what's going to go on over the next 6 months to ensure that they actually apply those skills and they use the tools, and that there is, as you mentioned, the reinforcement and follow-up. And so I think if we look at training as a mechanism for behavior change, as opposed to, book smart, or hey, they can take a knowledge test and show that we transferred some knowledge. That doesn't make the end game, or doesn't accomplish that objective. I think we need to make sure that we're working on a program that changes behavior, which may look like an initial training event, but then looks like ongoing reinforcement and specifically coaching and follow-up by the manager to make sure they're doing things differently.
Yeah, I mean, the key to any sort of behavior change is repetition. So, yeah, having a one-time event, if it's not tied to some sort of, you said, ongoing coaching, ongoing implementation within the field, increasingly you see some new mobile platforms that are coming out that people are using in some of the larger enterprises. Yeah, unless people are engaging with the content frequently and trying to put into practice on a regular basis what they learned, yeah, it's just, I think Xerox, talked about years and years ago with even in their own incredible training centers that they had back in Virginia and other places, is that their surveys were that their students forgot 90% of what they learned within the first month. And that's just, we're just humans. That's going to happen.
Right. Absolutely. And especially if there isn't some expectation and mechanism. One of the things we like to do is at the conclusion of that, if it is an in-person workshop, there needs to be a clear commitment. And in fact, the participants need to script that out and say, here's what I'm going to do. And also they know that, 30 days from now, or 3 weeks, 30 days from now, there's going to be a follow-up session, and I'm going to be expected to come in having applied these skills and be prepared to talk about it, bring in a case study, or bring in a call planner, or bring in a negotiation plan, whatever that skill is, and be able to talk about it. And for our managers, they need to have gone on a coaching call and come in and be prepared to talk about how that coaching call went. Well, now you both have the accountability and you have some real things to talk about, as opposed to just going back over the slides or presenting material.
And one of the key reasons, again, back to what we talked about before, that doesn't happen is that companies are skimping on their budget for training. I think until you see this sort of fundamental mind shift from away from an event, as you said, to a curriculum, an ongoing, day after day, week after week curriculum that companies embrace for educating their sales teams, we're always going to be stuck in this rut of sort of stop and start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think unless we rethink that, and in some cases it may take a larger commitment, but you think of the cost of that training failing, what's the true cost of that,
right,
versus the benefit or the impact of getting it right, and the significant ROI that would be associated with that. We really need to look at how do we do that successfully, and if that means we need to extend it out over a period of 6 months, let's look at what it's going to take. And as you mentioned, there's now technology and tools and ways that we can do that without flying everybody back in and getting together every 3 months or something. We can use virtual technology as we do, the virtual classroom. We're also partners with organizations that provide mobile and ongoing incremental learning, so that we deliver those out to the mobile device and have that spaced reinforcement where it stays top of mind. And the research suggests that, hey, even just the fact that we're having to apply those skills every couple of days improves our retention and actually helps create behavior change.
Well, that's why I said the behavior change, I think, is really the critical thing. I think about what like QStream is doing with their QStream with the big pharma companies, where they create the scenarios and they're pretty contextual, actually. So the reps, they're getting something that makes sense for what they're doing on their phone, and it takes 3 minutes, as you said, it's just minutes. It takes like 3 minutes a day when they have to do it. But it's that reminder, it's that reinforcement. They're then going to think on their next call, oh yeah, I should be doing that, right? And that's going to get people educated. And I think it seems to me like, tying back to one of the points you had made about solutions oftentimes being too complex that we're trying to train, is that we miss the ball by, through the complexity and focusing really on, I call it some more advanced skills as opposed to just fundamental behaviors. I talked to hundreds of CEOs and sales leaders and so on as part of doing the show. And one of the most consistent themes I hear about problems that they see CEOs find in their own organizations is, when the person actually gets face to face with the other person or on the phone with the other person, is the inability to engage in a meaningful way. and they're spending all this money to make it happen, is one of the biggest problems they have. And it's like, it seems like we get into sales training, we're teaching at a higher level than that, when we should be still just make sure everybody, no matter how senior they are, in my mind, would benefit more from reinforcing that training as opposed to going to elevated skill training.
Absolutely. And, we use some sports analogies time and again in training. And I think here, though, it's very applicable about those fundamentals, right? When you look at the best athletes, choose your sport, but the best athletes in any endeavor, it's those fundamentals that make them great. And in fact, they practice those fundamentals every day, right? They go to the batting cage, the driving range, they go out to the pitch or the rink or whatever, and they're practicing. And I think with our sales professionals, we often think, okay, they've been through training, now they've got it. And, as I like to joke, if we're having them practice in front of the customer, that's a really expensive way to do training.
It absolutely is. Absolutely is. And I sort of get back, I tell people, I said, if you gave me a choice between hiring somebody who I thought was and could prove was extremely responsive, responsiveness was their thing, versus someone that was really sort of highly skilled maybe in giving a presentation, I'd go with the fundamental behavior, the responsiveness, all day long. I'd kill the other person if I had the responsive person.
Right.
And those are things that build the rapport with the customers. Those are things that start the engagement, that build trust. And I just feel like we shortcut that too often.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we either gloss over it or there isn't enough time to practice and to continue to reinforce. And as you mentioned with QStream, we're actually a QStream partner. So, as you mentioned that, I definitely resonated that being able to continue to apply and doing it in a kind of a fun way where you're, maybe competing with your peers a little bit, but you're applying it to a scenario as opposed to feeling like you're being tested. And now, even a question like, okay, what might you do in this situation to continue to build rapport or to engage, or what kind of questions would you ask? Those are great ways of reinforcing those key skills.
All right. So the last point about year 6 that we've already covered, which was the fact there are no reinforcement programs in place. But I had some on my own list of reasons why corporate sales training fails. So, and I just wanted to run through some of those with you. So the first one is no one's directly held responsible for the results of sales training. I mean, it has to be somebody's job. If it was someone's job to be responsible for the outcomes of sales training, and if they got fired, if those outcomes weren't there, I think we would have seen a change a long time ago. I sort of think about, you give the sports analogy, and I was thinking it sort of in the context of, the NCAA now, for all of its flaws, has this APR rating, or academic progress rating, that they rate all the Division I schools on, in terms of, it's like an aggregate score of how well they're doing in the classroom and the attendance, and actually it's progress toward graduation, I guess, is the metric.
Right.
But there's someone in each athletic program that's responsible for that score, and if the scores don't get better, there's problems. And so it seems like until we have some sort of, I don't know if it's an aggregate measure of performance on a sales team, but it has to be something there where there's a way to measure collectively whether it's effective or not, and somebody is on the hook for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it relates to, one of the other points, which is, do we know what this is trying to accomplish, and do we know what we're going to measure 6 months from now, what's going to be different? And I think when we look at, the classical Kirkpatrick model of measurement, did they enjoy it? Did they learn anything? Are they applying it? And is it making a business, difference or providing business results? I think we're pretty good at the first two. We can measure if they like the training and we get good satisfaction scores, and we can test them. But as we said, the knowledge itself doesn't mean that they're going to do anything with it. And salespeople as a whole, at least my experience, don't appreciate that anyway. Now you're going to give me a test after this.
Well, yeah, that's one of the cultural things that needs to be worked on as well, because that's one of my last points I was going to get to is that some companies do a good job with this, but again, by and large, most companies don't focus on creating this learning environment. And unfortunately for salespeople, there's a big portion of the onus of them developing professionally is put on them personally in their personal time. I mean, training notwithstanding, if you say, I started a program with a couple clients this year, we're recording in 2016, this will air in 2017, but where we created a reading curriculum with a bunch of ongoing coaching and so on. But in order to enroll in the program, the client had to agree to set aside 20 minutes a day during the workday for their sales team to read and engage in this curriculum. And you wouldn't believe when I tell people about this, how many sales leaders say, "What? We'd never give time during the day for our guys to get smart." And it's like, seriously?
Right.
I mean, you'll spend a day and you'll bring in somebody for $30,000 to run a workshop, but we were running this program for a little over $10,000, and people in the course of a year, they read 11 books they would never have read before to educate them about sales and decision making and the buyers and so on. And all it took was an investment of 20 minutes a day.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of getting those commitments, and also somebody saying this is important and I'm going to sponsor it. Back to are the stakeholders involved, and are they visible, and are they making a point? And to the question of who's really held responsible, if that's the VP of sales or chief sales officer saying we want this to be successful, they'll make those kind of commitments. If they're leaving it, unfortunately, to a learning and development professional or a sales enablement professional and saying, hey, we didn't get our ROI back, I don't think that's fair, right? I don't think you've set them up to be successful if you're not going to get the kind of sponsorship that you need. And so I think we really need to look back and say, again, what are we expecting to happen differently? Do we have the executives involved? And then one other point I guess I'll make on that is, are we engaging and holding the managers responsible for the success of their team applying these concepts?
Sure.
Because the trainer can't be out in the field with them. And even if you have, internal coaches, there aren't enough of them to be out there. The manager needs to be, as another blog I wrote, the chief training officer, right? They need to assume that responsibility of, aside from corporate training, I'm going to do things like have them read a blog article every week, or I'm going to do a session in my team meeting where we're going to role play objectives or objections that come up, and we're going to simulate that environment. I think the manager then needs to be the one who ultimately sees it through, and they're only going to do it if the executives are saying, yes, this is part of our change program. Exactly. It's part of our overall, implementation. And guess what? It's important. And if you don't do it, there are consequences for not doing that.
Yeah. And I would like to see the whole area changed in terms of how we even name it, is instead of saying sales training, it's sales education. Because, we have a commitment to continuously educating our people, and training, again, smacks of event-oriented type events, to be redundant. But with education, and I've interviewed a number of CEOs on the show that have done just as I've done with these clients, is they set aside time during the day, because it's saying, we know if we tell a salesperson, look, read this blog article tonight and we're going to talk about tomorrow, we're saying we're giving you an assignment to go read it at home. And how important is it to us if we think you're going to go read it at home, as opposed to saying, look, we're going to take a little bit of our day and we're going to devote it to making us smarter about what you do.
Yeah.
And the ROI to me on that, again, anecdotally, pretty significant.
Yeah. And I think it sets a tone as well, that it's important that we're investing. And I think, regardless, and you could look at millennials and say, okay, well, that development and mastery is really important to them. I think it crosses generations, right? I think all of us would feel like, wow, they're investing in me, they're making this important, and I have a chance to improve my skills, whether I stay here for 30 years or 6 months. This is something that's helping me improve. Absolutely. Now there's more engagement. I think it helps from a cultural standpoint.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, it starts at the top, and just can't be afraid to use some of the time that you have these people. And statistics are what? Sales reps on average spend roughly a third of their time actually engaged with customers. And we could all say, we'd love to see that number higher, but there's a number of factors that play into why that number isn't larger and how hard it is to make it higher. But be that as it may, it means there's time during the day that's not taken away from talking to customers that could be used for professional development, educating these people. Right. Let's use it. Okay. So, Ray, we got the last segment of the show. I've got, let's set standard questions I ask all my guests. And first one is a hypothetical scenario where you, Ray, have just been hired as VP of sales by a company whose sales have sort of hit the skids, and the reset button needs to be hit, sales turnaround put into place. So what 2 things would you do in your first week on the job as the new sales leader that could have the biggest impact?
Wow. Well, I love that question. It's actually in line with a case study we use in our sales management curriculum.
Uh-huh.
And so I think it does. I think it's true, right? I mean, it's true to life in terms of that's a challenge that some of us have been thrust into, or a realistic one, and one you need to get your arms around pretty quickly. And so I guess I'd suggest 2 things immediately. One is I would really want to engage the managers, so the sales leadership team, whether that's the directors and frontline managers, first to find out what's going on. You know, what is the situation with performance management, with coaching? You know, what are their skill sets? Are they really engaged? Because as we say, I would want to start with the frontline managers, because that's where you're going to get the most leverage, right? If they have 8 to 10 direct reports, well, let's affect that. Have they set expectations? Have they clarified what success looks like for their team? Have they actually put the metrics in place to track? And if there's a gap in performance, do they know what to do about it? Right. So I'd kind of want to understand, and that's how we approach a performance management system. Is any of that in place? And then I'd also want to find what we kind of refer to as a top performer analysis or top producer analysis. What are the good people doing that's working? Right. And, why aren't the others doing it? Right. So they're just that we have a couple of anomalies. We have some superstars and we need to go get more superstars, or that a few people figured it out. Well, let's do that, whether we engage somebody to do that analysis or maybe just some interviews. I want to understand really what the rock stars are doing right and how do we replicate that, which might be through training, might be through better engagement with the managers, what have you. But I guess those would be my 2 initial thoughts is, one, how do we engage the managers better? And how do we find out what the top performers are doing? All right. Excellent. Good answer. All right. So now I've got a few rapid fire questions. You can give me 1-word answers or you can elaborate if you wish. So the first one is, when you, Ray, are out selling your services, what's your most powerful sales attribute? You personally. So I'm going to give 2, I guess, but they're tied together. Sure. No, I think active listening skills have got to be at the top of the list. And I do feel like, we get some pretty good feedback on that. Hey, you guys really listen to us. We appreciate that. So I think asking great questions and then shutting up and listening. Love it. And understanding and giving feedback, paraphrasing, all of those active listening techniques both help with rapport, which you mentioned earlier, but also help us really understand what's going on there and what's that problem that we uniquely now can solve in a different way than our competition. Okay. So I guess that'd be at the top of the list for me. Excellent. All right. Next question. Who's your sales role model? Wow. I have a hard time answering that one. I certainly have seen organizations that do it well. So I guess I will say, when I've seen sales working effectively, and so I'm going to use the organizational analogy, it's because they take sales as a discipline, to your point, of improving every day and also coaching the key skills. So the best organizations, and when I think about the best salespeople, it's because there is this culture of selling and the managers are out there riding along with the reps. They're going on the field visits. They're engaging with the customer. And they're doing those things to say, this is a profession. In fact, this is at the top of the food chain, because unless we sell something, nothing's going to happen. Right. So we're going to make this important. So I guess I took that a little tangent, but those generic, are the kind of sales manager that I like, and absolutely that they're going to be able to lead that. All right. Yep. So what's one book you'd recommend that every salesperson read? Well, I think self-serving aside, I'm a fan of our High Impact Sales Manager book that we published this year.
Okay, but besides one that you wrote, I should have caveated that. I'm sorry.
Right. Right. So, and I'm going to go back because I will say, and one of the reasons I'm hesitating is because there is so much noise out there.
Sure.
And every time I find a new sales book and I, have most of them on my shelf and I get, partway through and I think, well, okay, there's some good nuggets in here. And then there's a whole bunch of just noise or, personal opinions. So, I'm going to go back a ways, maybe date myself a little bit, but early on in my Anderson consulting career, I was given a copy and actually went through the 7 Habits workshop.
Sure.
Stephen Covey,
yeah.
And it really changed the way I thought about a lot of things. And I think what's interesting is if we think about that from a sales paradigm, things like a win-win, things like seeking first to understand, some of those 4 fundamental principles to me are still there, to this day, and I think are underlying a lot of what makes a salesperson successful. So I guess that'd be on the top of my list.
Well, I recently wrote a blog post after our 300th episode. I compiled the results of this answers to this question, and the number one book recommended is Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. So
okay, yeah.
Don't have to worry about dating yourself since that's number one by far. So okay, last question then is what music is on your playlist right now?
Wow. So I'll share a little bit about my playlist, but I have a playlist that I listen to quite often. That's all 90 beats per minute because that's actually a good running pace.
Yeah.
And that means it goes from Pearl Jam to Stevie Wonder to various parts of jazz and blues. And it's probably one of the most eclectic lists. A lot of Earth, Wind, and Fire, a little bit of Tower of Power. So it kind of crosses the whole gamut there.
All right. So what sort of pace does that have you running at?
Well, you just make more steps even if you're going slower. So it's one of the keys to successful running, by the way, is it takes a lot of load off if you're making more steps.
That's true. That's true. I've shortened my stride quite a bit as I've gotten older.
Yeah, I have run a number of marathons and was fortunate to run Boston a few years back. So had to step up my pace a little bit for that one.
Yeah, I was going to say to qualify, that's not a slow pace typically. So, well, good. Well, Ray, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. So tell people how they can find out more about you and connect with you and Sales Readiness Group.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to be on the show today. Website is salesreadinessgroup.com. And you can read our blog there. So it's just /blog. And that has the article you mentioned that we published, I think, just last week, as well as a couple of others I'll mention about, become the chief training officer of your team, as well as things a manager can do to help ensure training successful before, during, and after. So some of those key things. On Twitter as well, Ray, middle initial A, Makela. On Twitter, and reach out to us. Would love to hear more and engage. And again, appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming. And friends, thank you for spending time with us today. Really appreciate you spending the half hour or so with us as we listen to the conversation with Ray. And remember, as always, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your own success. And one way to do that is make sure you don't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Ray Makela, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So until next time, this is Andy Paul. Thanks for joining us. Good selling, everyone.